Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a new week of programs here at the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. A new week in a new month. Today is the third day of October in the year 2016, and tomorrow we're 5 weeks away from the election. And I kind of made a kind of a comment. It was considered to be kind of sarcastic, but actually, when I thought about it, it probably wasn't that far off. By the time 5 more weeks, there'll be actually physical blows being thrown. The name calling has gone way beyond anything I've ever seen before. Civility is a word that doesn't even appear in the dictionary anymore as a result of this election. It's unbelievable. I put an entry on Facebook the other day, and I found a piece in the Boston Globe on Elizabeth Warren taking to Twitter to Twitter rather. And did I say Twitter? My God, this sounds like a parakeet. Anyway, Twitter and unleashing your own Twitter storm, as it were, on Donald Trump the way he did on Hillary over the weekend at 3 a.m. And made some comments about him, and I thought, this is another 5 weeks of this, and we'll actually be putting them in a ring. And what I was thinking about was Donald's wall, and we could just put them in the middle and see which one comes out. One of those cage fights that we hear so much about. Unbelievable. And my own case, I've got 5 more weeks of campaigning to do as well. And assuming that I survive the campaign, people have been asking me this weekend about, do you think you're going to win or whatever? And at this point, that's so far off in the distance that it's a totally different issue to me. The main thing is surviving the campaign. Worry about winning and losing later. But anyway, it is a pleasure to be with you for this new week here at the Virtual Center. With the campaign heating up, of course, I want to try to meet as many of our obligations here at the Virtual Center as possible, because I kind of anticipate that there's going to be 1 or 2 occasions in the coming weeks where I'm not going to be able to do a program because I'm going to have a scheduling conflict of one sort or another. I believe, in fact, that I have one next Tuesday, now that I know about, because I'm scheduled to be in Monroe County at 4. And Monroe County is better than an hour from where I broadcast from. So that's going to really raise havoc with our Tuesday program next week. But so my goal is to try to, as long as I continue to go without having a scheduling conflict, I want to make sure that I meet these obligations. And what that means is that we're putting more and more programs on archive, which means that if we need to replace a live program with one of these from the pre-recorded ones, we can do that. Welcome to our program. Welcome to a new week. Welcome to a new month. I hope that your weekend was good, and that you got to spend time with those you care most about. I've become a real fan. I celebrated, if you can call it that. I celebrated a birthday last week, and I've received good wishes from a number of folks on Facebook. I couldn't possibly answer them all. It got to be in excess. I mean, literally, I got more than 100 people who made reference to it, and it really makes you feel darn good. And I'll tell you, because birthdays, at this point in my life, I mean, to me, having them is the victory. And the mere fact that you have one means that it's been a good day. But I couldn't respond to them all, although a few of them were just absolutely delightful, and I had to respond. But the day after, on Friday, on the 30th of September, I put an entry on Facebook and thanked all the people who who took the time to wish me a happy birthday. And And I meant this very sincerely, and I wanted to. In fact, I was so serious about it. That's one of the reasons I wanted to mention it on the air here at the Virtual Center. A lot of people are skeptical about Facebook, and I was as well. It took me a long time to get into it because I've heard of a lot of people getting in some serious trouble because of the information they put on Facebook. They put too much on there. They sometimes, for example, will get carried away and tell people what their schedule is and when they're going to be out of town and everything else, and then their houses are robbed or their apartments are robbed or whatever. So, I've seen examples over the years of the number of people that have gotten in trouble with Facebook, so I scrupulously avoided it for a long time. But once we started our program here at the Virtual Center, it just seemed like a logical thing to do and a logical place to go in order to get some of this material down in writing, and so that people would have an opportunity to see it, read it, exchange it, copy it, share it, whatever. And it's been that. But as I mentioned in my thank you to those who expressed congratulations on my birthday, it means something more, and I hadn't appreciated it. And what I said was that all those who are skeptical about Facebook and are really in favor of doing away with it or getting rid of it or something need to withhold their comments until after their next birthday. Because believe me, there's something about the people, the number of people that you hear from. It's just a happy birthday, Bill kind of thing. That's all it has to be. But you're hearing from people that you haven't heard from in a couple of years, 3 years, 5 years, people that maybe you've even forgot about until you get that short salutation. It gives all of us an opportunity to keep in touch with people with whom we don't want to lose touch. And I think in life, I know all of you have experienced this, and I have as well, more often than I wish were true. And that is, people who meant a great deal to me have left us. And I really felt like I never really got the chance to say what I really wanted to say to them. And I missed that. And Facebook is not the same as person-to-person contact. We know that. But it's a way to stay in contact. It's a way to touch people. And in my case, I was the recipient last Wednesday. And I was being touched over and over and over again by people that I hadn't heard from in a long time, people that I had actually forgotten about. And kind of made mental notes to myself and said, I've got to stay in better touch with him or her or whatever. And at the end of the day, as I sat down to write that thank you on Thursday, I began to really appreciate what Facebook is doing. I know that there are problems with it. I know that there's a lot of advertising on it, and people are taking advantage of Facebook to hawk their wares and all the rest of it. We know all of that. But the fact of the matter is, there are positives, and this is one. And I really think that this is an important one. I really believe it's a way to create community and togetherness in a world where everything seems to be working against it. And if for no other reason than that, it seems to me it's a medium or a strategy or a method or a technology that we need to work on. What I mean by working on it is we need to figure out ways to use it more effectively for positive good. We know that it can be used for evil. But the fact of the matter is it has the potential to be useful for good as well. And we need to concentrate on that, and we need to do it. The worst thing we would want to do is get rid of it before we've really experienced or discovered the full potential of it. And so my recommendation is for those people that think that they want to get rid of Facebook, wait until after your next birthday. And if you still feel that way, fine. But I was really in a pretty darn good mood the day after on Thursday when I was writing that. I felt really good because I felt that I was communicating with 100 and some odd people. And I thought, boy, that's a lot of contacts, a lot of people to care about. More importantly, a lot of people to care enough about me to make contact on this special day. And that ain't that bad. That's a good thing. And I think there are people in the world who would give anything to be able to share that experience. So don't ever take it lightly. That's my recommendation. But anyway, that's all. This is not an advertisement for Facebook in any way. I didn't mean that. But it's a technology that gives us an opportunity to touch each other in a world where that's becoming more and more difficult. I, for example, have in my adult life have had my first wife passed away, as I've said, and I had a whole family with children and grandchildren and all of that. Now I'm fortunate enough to have yet another one. So I've had two family, well, actually three, my own family, of course. But I've had two families through marriage in my life. And Facebook gives me an opportunity to stay in touch with people that physically I don't see anymore. And it's a very, very positive thing. It's a very good thing. I can watch the children grow up, the grandchildren grow up, and all of that. It's wonderful. So anyway, that's enough of that. I'm not in the position. But again, if anybody wants to write a check, I'd be glad to, if Facebook would like to thank me for that unsolicited testimonial, I'd be glad to take it. I can contribute it to Head On Network, contribute it to the programming here at the Horn. Anyway, welcome to another week of programming here at the Virtual Center on this Monday, the 3rd day of October. It is a pleasure. As I mentioned, I hope that your weekend was good. I do invite you to participate actively in our program. Agnes is in the studios at Head On Radio Network today, and if you choose to come on the air and give us a call, Agnes will make sure that we get you on the air. She'll kind of alert me. If I was sitting at a computer, she could just send me a message on the computer on the chat line that there was somebody there. But I don't sit at the computer. I wander around. I walk 8 to 10 miles every time we do a 2-hour program. And so therefore, when Bob Kincaid is in the studio, or when Agnes, they know if they want to get my attention, they're going to have to shout at me over the air. So, but they'll do that. Because if you do call, we want to get you on the air. That's the most important thing that we do here at the Virtual Center, is give our listeners and our participants an opportunity to exchange their ideas amongst themselves. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, by all means, give us a call while we're on the air live. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. That number will get you into the Head On Radio Network studios, and Agnes will get you on the air from that vantage point. If you'd like to communicate your thoughts or ideas, but are reluctant to go on the air, and I can surely understand if that's true, then by all means, feel free to drop me an email, and I'll take the responsibility of getting your thoughts and your ideas on the air. And I'll try to do the very best I can by you to make sure that your intent is fully captured in the presentation on the air. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN, 906@gmail.com. And I'm almost afraid to say this after the opening we have, but we do have a Facebook page. Surprise, surprise. And if you go to Facebook and in the search box at the top of the homepage, if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will have access to our Facebook page. And one of the items that I want to share with you in a moment is basically mentioned. I did put a link on the Facebook page a couple of days ago And I want to share that one with you because I really think it's very, very relevant, especially to the campaign that's going on. But before we get into anything more substantive, and please believe me, I have not forgotten that when we left you on Wednesday, we had just finished Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise speech and talked about Booker T. Washington's approach to including the ex-slaves in the economic development of the post-Civil War South. And we didn't really get a lot of time to go back and pull out the highlights of that and really look at and digest the meat, the substance of what Booker T. Washington was saying and how he was saying it. So I realized we're going to have to go back and revisit it. And then we're going to look at the alternatives. Primarily the alternative proposed by W.E.B. Du Bois in his Soul of Black Folks and in his brilliant essay written early in the 20th century entitled The Talented Tenth. We will get to this probably later in our program, and if not today, we'll pick it up tomorrow. But I realize that we have left this hanging, and we have a story we have a theme to complete, to finish, and I don't want to leave any strings untied if I can help it. Let me on that particular topic, before we leave it momentarily for a moment, let me share with you that issue has come up even more solidly since last we were together. I had talked about Colin Kaepernick's protest, the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, and his protest of refusing to stand for the national anthem as kind of background or a lead-in or a contextual introduction, if you will, to the Booker T. Washington document. Well, in the intervening time since last we were together, that same issue has come up again, this time in the National Basketball Association, the NBA. The newly acquired center for the New York Knicks, who was traded from the Chicago Bulls this July, Joakim Noah, it's pronounced Joakim. I always thought it was Joakim. But, you know, everybody, all the people who broadcast the basketball games call him Joakim Noah. So they anglicize his name. But many people will appreciate the fact that his dad was an absolute superstar in the field of professional tennis. And I remember his dad playing tennis very well. And Noah is one heck of a basketball player. And I think the Knicks have really done a great thing in picking him up. He always, I remember him when he was in college at Florida. And I used to hope that the Boston Celtics would draft him because he had that kind of an attitude. He's a scrapper. He's a tough guy and just a wonderful basketball player. And I had hoped that by hook or crook, the Celtics would find a way to nail him, but they didn't. Now he's been traded by the Bulls, and they didn't get him again. The Knicks got him, so I'm going to have to sweat through another year but I absolutely do respect his ability. He always plays for the other side when the Celtics are playing, but he's one player that I really have respected for a long time. Anyway, the Knicks were invited to an event at West Point, which is up the Hudson from New York City, Manhattan, as many of you know. And the Knicks went up there and they had a camp. And were doing a camp for the athletic, for the cadets at West Point. And it so happened that evening there was a dinner. And the team was invited to the dinner, and the speaker was a retired general in the military who obviously was speaking at West Point. He was a graduate of West Point, and he obviously was speaking about America's military efforts in the Middle East and with ISIS and all the rest of it. And Joakim Noah decided that he could not, in conscience, attend the dinner. And he boycotted it. And he's a pacifist. He's long been a pacifist. It's no secret that he's a pacifist. And therefore, he created a situation for the team and for West Point because he was their guest. His team was their guest. But on the other hand, he felt that he couldn't do it, that it would violate his commitment to pacifism. And he joined the ranks of Colin Kaepernick in standing up for his principles and expressing his rights as an individual and all the rest of it. So the fact of the matter is, we have yet another example of how relevant this issue is in our society today, namely the First Amendment freedom to protest, to stand for principle when it becomes uncomfortable or difficult to do that, and what it might mean. That's the same issue that Booker T. Washington confronted at the Civil War. What is the best way that we can move in order to find an opening that give ex-slaves the opportunity to be included in the dynamism and economic growth of the post-Civil War industrial South? Washington had one strategy. Du Bois will have another. And the competition between those two strategies, it seems to me, gets down to the issue of protest itself even today. I think that Joaquin Noah's protest at West Point, Colin Kaepernick's protest during the national anthem before the start of NFL football games, all of these express a way for these people to demonstrate their individuality and their own principles. It seems to me that one of the issues we're going to be dealing with here, and that's why we've got to return to it because it's very important, is the value of protest. And whether in fact protest really works or protest merely becomes the opportunity for people who dissent to feel good and feel like they've taken a stand when in effect they really haven't accomplished a whole heck of a lot. I think that's the issue we've got to deal with. It's an important one to all of us in a number of different ways, in a number of different situations or venues. So it's an issue that we will indeed return to here at the Virtual Center. But like we always do on a Monday, since it's been 5 days since we've been together, today has kind of become one of those this, that, and the other days, as we often do on Monday, because so many things have happened since the last time we've gotten together. I think the biggest thing that happened, of course, is the New York Times unveiling of Donald Trump's 1995 income tax returns. And I think that's the one that's getting much of the attention on the national level and on the international level, most likely, today. And it's one that I'd like to spend some time with, before we get too far into our program today. But what I'd like to open with, if I can, is a little story that happened to me this weekend. It reminds me of the days when I was in elementary school and the teacher used to tell us on Monday that we had to sit down and write a paragraph, a composition on what I did this weekend. Well, this is what I did this weekend. I had an incident, and I just kind of wanted to share it with you because it seems to be one worth sharing. There seems to me there's a message or a point to this. I think it's a little bit funny in a way, but in another way it's not funny at all. I went to a campaign event on Saturday night here in southern West Virginia. It's one that I committed to attend some weeks ago. And we were invited, candidates were invited, and were given 5 minutes to speak at this particular event. And there was going to be a nice dinner associated with it, as well as a silent auction. And the proceeds from the silent auction would, of course, go to support the work of the organization that sponsored the dinner. So it was a meet the candidates night. And I went, and actually we were asked to be there at 4 p.m. on Saturday, and I was there. Turned out that dinner wasn't until 6, so most of the first hour to hour and a half was spent interacting with the people that were there, including other candidates, of course, and the people that attended as well. When I arrived, the gentleman who's the president of this organization greeted me at the door and introduced himself, and I introduced myself to him and told him how glad I was to be there and how appreciative I was for the invitation and such and such and such and such. And we walked inside the hall, and he introduced me to the vice president of this particular organization. And I shook his hand, and that was that. Then we began to interact with the people who had turned out for the event. We were meeting people and talking a little bit about our campaign and handing out cards and talking about some of the issues and all the rest of it. And that went on for probably an hour and a half before we got to the formal 5-minute presentations of the candidates. And then around 6 o'clock or 6:15 in the evening, we were served an absolutely delightful dinner. And in Southern West Virginia, it was fried chicken, and it was good, let me tell you. Anyway, my story. About a half an hour into the social hour, so to speak, the interaction that preceded the formal speeches, one of the women who was volunteering there, putting the meal together, came over and asked me, and very nice, if I would like to have a cup of coffee. And I said, I would love one. And she said, well, there's a pot of fresh coffee right around the corner, and there are cups there. Feel free to go around the corner and get yourself a cup of coffee if you'd like one. And I said, thank you very much, and I did that. And I walked around the corner, and there was the coffee, and I started to pour the coffee into my cup. And right there was a conversation. There were 3 or 4 people standing around in a circle drinking coffee, and they were talking about the election, the national election. And I couldn't help hearing it as I stood there and poured my own coffee. So when I was finished, I kind of turned around and I became part of the conversation circle. I was in it. And so I just stood there. I didn't say much, and different people were exchanging ideas about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, the Democrats, the Republicans, et cetera, all the things that you would expect to hear. I wasn't at all surprised. And then one of the people made a comment about something that did strike a bell, because it's something that we've talked about here at the Virtual Center, and it was specifically about higher education, and more particularly about training, about skills training, and we've done a lot with that here. So immediately my ears perked up. And this person was talking about the fact that we needed to find a way to retrain a large number of people in the region whose skills are not up to the 21st century standards for the kinds of jobs that are available or the kinds of jobs that we would like to attract into this region. And I immediately spoke up and said that it seems to me that that there's a responsibility or an obligation on the part of our colleges and universities to take up that challenge and to do something about it, because that's the contribution that they can make to the state and the region that they are located in. And in response to that, the gentleman who I had been introduced to as the vice president of the organization spoke up and talked, and he was talking about Hillary Clinton. And he made a very, very negative, sarcastic comment about Hillary Clinton. I'm going to share with you exactly what he said. And he said, quote, if, quote, the bitch, unquote, is elected, then that won't be a problem, because everybody in the world is going to get a free college education. And he kind of snickered with that. In other words, this was, a rather negative comment on his part. And I was a little bit taken by that, and I thought, whoa, this could get serious here. Maybe given the fact that I'm gonna be sitting down to have dinner with these people, maybe I just better keep my mouth shut and kind of slide, gracefully out of this conversation. And I did. I backed away, and I got into a conversation with other people, and I forgot about it. Then, lo and behold, we had the formal speeches, and I got up and did my 5-minute speech. And then we had dinner. And the president of the organization, who was hosting or moderating the speakers, said, now we're going to basically have dinner. It'll be buffet. But before we did, we want to take the opportunity to say grace. And he immediately called on the vice president of the organization to come up to the front of the room and lead the group in prayer. And the vice president, who had just 15 or 20 minutes earlier referred to Hillary Clinton as the bitch, got up in the front of the room and basically said, everyone, please stand and bow your heads while we pray. And I'll tell you, it was one of the most interesting expressions of grace before a meal that I'd had in a long time. And I thought, boy, if this is the campaign. Afterwards, I called my wife and told her what I experienced, and of course she said, I told you, those are the kinds of things you're going to get. You got to be aware of that. But I thought to myself, my heavens, it kind of reminded me of the sign that we discussed somewhat last week. Bob Kincaid put on Facebook, if you remember, the sign that he saw about measuring the quality of your candidates by how closely their position on issues conform to Scripture, to the Bible. And I thought, whoa, this is tough. This is going to be tough. Anyway, I made up my mind that when we went on the air for this week's program, I would share that little story with you because it's one that really happened to me, and I think all of us can take something from that. I think it tells all of us what's going on. It tells all of us about the election, and I think all of us can basically learn something from it. And plus the fact it's the irony of the contradiction, it seems to me, is pretty obvious. That there are examples of hypocrisy, and then there are other examples of hypocrisy, and some of them are much better than others. And I think that's one of the better ones. But anyway, with that, I'm going to drop that subject. But I wanted to share it with you because basically it touches on a number of issues that are so real. And in many ways, it touches on some of the issues related to the campaign itself, not just locally here, but the national campaign itself. And that gets us to the Facebook entry that I posted some days ago. And basically, what I did was post on our Facebook page, and you can find it there. You're going to have to scroll down a little bit because it was 3 or 4 days ago that I put it on there. But the link was a link to an article in the Washington Post by Charles Krauthammer. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Charles Krauthammer. He's been around for a long time. He's one of the most prominent, well-known conservative commentators, journalists in the media. And he's been writing for the Washington Post for a number of years. He's on Fox News a lot. He's been a guest on Hannity and Greta Van Susteren when she was with Fox, and a number of others. He's a very, very popular guest. He's knowledgeable. He's glib. He's smooth. He writes well. He's perceptive. And I said that on my Facebook entry. I never thought that I would be posting a link recommending an article by Charles Krauthammer. But on the other hand, I need to be honest. He's bright and he's worth reading. He says a lot that is worth reflecting upon. If I have my issues with him, he usually goes in a direction that I'm not very comfortable going in. But that doesn't deny his competence. He's good. He's credible. He's got a mind. Therefore, he has a right to be heard, I believe. The title of his piece in the Washington Post is the following: When Facts, Logic, and History Don't Matter, unquote. When I saw that title, it immediately attracted me to the article, and I think you can understand why. It was a provocative title. When Facts, Logic, and History Don't Matter. And it was going to be clearly about the Trump campaign. And basically then, what Krauthammer was going to be addressing, even before I read the article, was the fact that in this campaign, none of the traditional rules seem to apply. None of the measures that we have traditionally used to evaluate a candidate or a strategy or a plan or whatever matter. Donald Trump has said things during the course of this campaign, both during the primaries and after the primaries, that in the past would have gotten a candidate eliminated from the running. They would have sabotaged and destroyed a presidential campaign. We won't go back through all of them as everybody talks about them. There's been a number. The attack on Khan, the Gold Star parents, and the attack most recently on the overweight Miss Universe, and all the rest of it. I mean, just the comments about women, the attack on Megyn Kelly, and on and on and on and on. Faux pas that in the past were enough to sink a campaign don't seem to matter in this one. It almost doesn't seem to matter what he says or how he says it or who he talks about or who he attacks. He even took on John McCain and got away with it. And attacked a prisoner of war because he was captured. Most people, most of the pundits believed that that was going to be the beginning of the end for Trump's campaign. Didn't cost him a lick. Krauthammer then makes the point that Trump's campaign in last Monday's debate with Hillary Clinton, he makes the point, no question, Hillary won the debate hands down. Everybody agrees with that. By whatever measure you measure performance, Hillary Clinton won that debate. But now, as we get some distance, some time for the polls to come in, what Krauthammer points out is that when you look at the numbers, even though Trump lost, it's not really reflected much at all in the result in the polls. The needle hardly moved at all. What that means is that the criteria that we usually use to evaluate a performance in a campaign don't work in this one. You can make mistakes, you can lie, you can attack, you can be uncivil, you can be cruel, you can be insensitive, you can mock disabled people, etc., 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 and it doesn't seem to matter that much. I mean, it matters, obviously, but not enough to affect Trump's standing in the campaign. So the question that Krauthammer writes about, and the question that I had and that I posed on Facebook, is why? How is it, or why is it, that none of the traditional measures of performance seem to matter in this one. Last Friday, early on Friday, I was watching Morning Joe on MSNBC. And one of the members of the panel was Chris Matthews, who has the evening program at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on MSNBC. And the reason I picked up on it was that I was surprised that Chris Matthews would be there that early in the morning, given the fact that he had just done his own hour program less than 12 hours before that. In the course of that discussion on Morning Joe, Chris Matthews began to give his point of view on a particular issue, the campaign, which seemed to me to answer the question that Krauthammer was raising in his article. Why is it that Trump seems to be able to get away with stuff that no candidate in the past has ever been able to get away with? And the result is the standards of civility in the campaign continue to go down, 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 down. I've already mentioned the Elizabeth Warren piece that was in the Boston Globe this weekend about Donald Trump's 3 a.m. tweets about Hillary. Chris Matthews took this issue on Morning Joe. And this is what he said, and this is why I put this on Facebook, and this is why I chose to share it with you here on the air in today's program at the Virtual Center. And this is my own words as to what I heard Chris Matthews saying. His view was that those who support Donald Trump, no matter what, are angry because, Matthews says, they love this country. And the establishment, what we call the establishment, has not been faithful to the nation that they love, they feel. And Hillary has been a key part of that establishment. Her, the pundits, the experts, the hedge fund managers, the millionaires and the billionaires, the college professors, the political leaders, the heads of the parties, all of them that you would associate with, quote, the establishment, unquote. All of them, Matthews said, have been unfaithful to what matters most to these people who support Donald Trump the most. They've been unfaithful to America's image in the world, to its reputation, its honor, its commitment to the ideals and principles that these people believe in most. And Donald Trump promises them that if they vote for him, he'll fix that. All of it. He doesn't say how. He doesn't have to. That he recognizes this position at all, that things need fixing, is all they care about. He is indeed their voice. They want back to a time when they believed things were different. And he promises that he'll take us there. How isn't really the issue. It doesn't matter. He'll figure that out. Like he seems to have figured out everything else that he's been involved in over the years. And those that criticize him, those that attack him for his faults, his mistakes, his ignorance on the issues, his inclination to lie or to exaggerate particular issues, why should we expect anything else. Of course they attack him, his supporters believe, because he'll fix what they've had years to fix and didn't. This, I believe, is important stuff, and we'd best pay attention to it. Even if Hillary wins the election, this stuff is not going to disappear. It's not going to go away. She'll have to deal with it, whether in fact she wants to or not.
Bill?
Yes, Agnes?
If I can just inject something there for a moment.
Go right ahead. Please do.
Talking about Trump's ability to stir the masses.
Right.
Now, I'm a nurse, and I can promise that I can take care of anything that you need, but if I don't have the tools to do it, then I'm going to fail.
Mm-hmm.
The public is responding to the anger, not to the person. He is part of the establishment. He's bought buildings, real estate, and turned out homeless, turned out disabled, trying to make it into his own utopia.
Mm-hmm.
So he has that history. This isn't an attack. When he came to West Virginia, he said, I love uneducated people.
Right.
Because he's not really educated. Just because he went to a private school doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
He's going on that mentality, and he has a lot of money behind him. Hillary's going on the idea that there is some logic and reason going on here. And mind you, I was a Bernie supporter. I still am. It's the idealism that I find appealing. Now, people can make promises, but that doesn't mean they're going to deliver. And when you vote on your emotions, then more than likely you're going to fail.
Because he'll fail.
Exactly. It's
right.
You know, I don't care about party lines, because it's the idea and the ability to follow through on those ideas that make a difference. Right now, West Virginia is bankrupt. The healthcare system, no matter what, if people will really think about it, your insurance premiums went up if you had private insurance because they want to continue making the money. The system itself is broken because that's the way it's been designed. And when you go to get health care, you know, you'll hear the mantra of, well, these people on welfare. It's not welfare. Your working poor are the ones paying into that, and they don't even get the satisfaction of what they bought into. So when people react on emotion, it's never going to work well.
Right, because they're putting their faith in somebody that doesn't have the capability to deliver.
Exactly. When the religion issue comes up, you know, if you're really going to talk about the Bible, then false prophets. People know how to work the system. And as you said, when the man went up there and called Hillary a bitch, but yet he's praying, that's hypocrisy in the first order.
But somehow he's been able to convince himself that he's just merely saying what is in fact true.
Well, in the deep dark of the night, you can't lie to yourself. I don't care if you're insane or you've got other issues. In the deep dark of the night, there are people who know what you really are. It depends on their ability to convey that.
Right.
And when you put your faith in someone who's not, the actions speak louder than the words. So when the election comes around, you have people ready to rally to going into this for someone who's basically going to take them just like he's taken other people.
I see what you're saying, yeah. So in reality, he's a member of the establishment in so many ways, but he's running against the establishment, and he's been able to convince these people that he'll be their champion in fighting it.
Exactly.
And so you're basically saying that his whole campaign is a lie.
It's a psychology experiment.
Right.
And he's got the people and he's got the money to fund that kind of thing.
And it seems to be working.
Well,
that's the scary part.
No, that's the thing. It is working because we've kind of de-evolved. We're not thinking anymore, and the us against them mentality has been prevalent for years.
There's a story that I read this weekend. It was in the Washington Post, and it was in the Sunday edition of the Washington Post, yesterday's edition. And it was front page story, a major story. It was about this 52-year-old woman in western Pennsylvania that attended the Trump rally the other night when Donald went off on Hillary. And of course, part of the reason that he went off like he did was because he was trying to lay the groundwork for the fact that the tax return was going to be it was headline news that day.
Exactly.
And so basically, he's trying to divert attention from the 1995 income tax that he filed by really getting into the mud about Hillary. I mean, really bad stuff. 3:00 in the morning, she was disloyal to Bill. She, all of this stuff. And then he said, "But to be honest with you, folks, why shouldn't she?"
Well, and that's the bait and switch. Anyone.
Oh yeah, that's what he's doing.
Well, and when people will believe 1,000 lies versus one truth.
Yeah.
Character assassination is the first attack.
Yep.
That's the best way to do it. Doesn't matter if it's true or not. Somebody will say this, and then they'll pass it on, and it ends up becoming one great big ball of crap.
Right. And he's done that. I mean, he's been able to do that. There's no question that at the end of the Democratic convention in June, or maybe it was July. I think it was July, June or July. Anyway, I think it was June. Hillary came out of that convention. That was the Democratic convention was absolutely a top of the line convention. She should have gotten enough mileage out of that to bury him.
Sure.
But lo and behold, the Thursday night that she spoke, that was the night that the Gold Star parent, Mr. Khan, spoke. And Donald took off on him. And that made his presentation the whole focus of the campaign for the next 10 days.
Yeah.
And Hillary never got the mileage out of the convention that she should have gotten.
Well, think about this. Anyone who steps back and doesn't react emotionally, you see him attacking veterans, which supposedly America is all about, the poor, which in general, there's a lot of people who are very, very poor. Not because they're sitting around drawing welfare. It's because they're working and working and working and can't make ends meet.
Exactly.
He's part of the problem.
Yeah.
And when he attacks women, do you think that this is a man that's going to make paid maternity leave or any of the things possible for working mothers and fathers to come together? Because it does take two people to run a family, actively working together. And what we're doing is we're allowing that wedge to occur.
Yeah. Well, what you've said is absolutely fantastic. Not only do I agree with you, but I think most of the listeners would agree with you as well that what you're saying is right on. You've really gotten to the heart of his campaign and how he's doing it, how he's running it, and why he's so successful. And what you've also done is get at what the people who are supporting him are about.
They're desperate.
And they're angry, desperate, frustrated people who see things happening to them that they can't control. I mean, they feel helpless. They feel like they're just going down, 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 and there's nothing they can do. And here's somebody who says, I can fix it, and I will fix it if you give me a chance. And what do you have to lose? And what they're saying is, we don't care what he says, does, lies, cheats, insults. It doesn't matter. The only positive thing we've got to hang on to is his promise to fix it.
And that's it. And he hasn't fixed the things that he already promised to do.
His tax return indicates that he lost $1 billion.
Yeah.
How can you, I mean, and basically what his defenders are saying is that he's playing the system the way the rules are written. Only he can fix the tax system because he knows how it works. Look what he did. He basically got a loss. He incurred losses totaling more than the budgets of 25 to 30 nations in the world.
Exactly. And what happens?
And he got it as a tax write-off.
And what can regular working people get? We all struggle every day.
Right.
It's not there for us. We don't have those friends. And we're accountable for it. If you turn over the keys to someone like that, you know, you can't cry after it's done because it's too late.
You know, if you think about it, in the last 45 minutes or so, we've heard Chris Matthews, we've heard Charles Krauthammer, who they're on opposite sides of the world philosophically. Matthews is the consummate liberal, and Krauthammer is the arch conservative. You know, he's George Will with I think with a mind.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, he really is. He's quite brilliant, and yet they say the same thing. And you're saying it as well. I think we've got it. I mean, I think that all of us have got it.
We do. And when you think about party lines, look, I am a liberal in the fact that I believe that what's good for me is good for everyone else. I conserve resources, and I'm a very independent person. When you think about it, you're a little bit of everything. And it is the person that represents that idea. It's you have to think with logic, not emotion. Because when it comes down to the tools to perform the job that you are hired to do, because let's face it, it's not an election process. You are being hired.
Right.
And
he's applying for a job, and you're the ones that are going to make the decisions as to whether he gets it or not.
Exactly. And what happens? He gets that job, you're going to pay.
Yeah.
And I don't really think that if Trump gets it, that we will be able to come back from it.
Do you think he will get it?
No, I don't. I really don't.
Do you think that at the 11th hour that people are going to wake up and come to the senses and see through him? And
I think if people pull back, because it's the high school mentality out there. It's the cliques. And people who don't speak, I mean, I don't usually speak. It's not something I do. I listen.
You do it pretty well.
Thank you so much.
You do.
But when you step back and you look at it, people in that crowd, there are a few that are very vocal. And those are the ones that are kind of running the show. The people behind, they're watching. So actions speak louder than words, be it religion, be it politics, or be it just your everyday life. When you see someone that you know is going to stab you in the back, you tend to shy away. They may say, I'm going to vote for Trump because he's going to make America great. But then when it comes to them going in privately in the polls, that's a whole different story. Now, we've lost traction because of cliques, because of tag words out there, communists, liberals, Republicans, conservatives. But in the end, you have to pay attention to what the person really stands for, their character. And I think that given the choices we have, I'm not happy with Hillary. I wouldn't say that I was. But given between the rock and the devil in the deep blue sea, I'm going to pick the one that I think that can best be reasoned with. And Trump is not a reasonable human being. His handlers have had a hard time keeping him on point because he goes on the mob mentality.
The Wall Street Journal this morning, basically in explaining Hillary and pretty much endorsing Hillary, said basically she's sane. And the implication is he's not.
And I think anyone that looks at it can pretty much tell that because Donald is not and never has been. If you go back even to his earlier years, he had a lot of problems in school because he was a bully then. The man would not have made it to where he is today had his father not protected him. If he had been an everyday Joe, they would have thrown his butt in jail.
Or beaten him to death.
Or beaten him to death, exactly.
Yeah.
So he was a very privileged individual. And the more that they can wedge that spike in between people, the better off they are. So they're going on that type of mentality, and if people don't pull together, then we're going to get exactly what we deserve.
You know, the irony, I was just thinking about this, and this is pretty much tied into what you've said, too, but, you know, it's almost ironic that we've been worried for a long time because so many people are politically illiterate. There are so many people that are politically uninformed who are going to the polls. And here we are now, hoping against hope that that's not true.
That's true.
That people will, that people will really come to their senses and begin to see what could happen if they go through with what they're promising.
I think they will. I really do. I think that there are going to be quite a few that walk in and say, well, this is what I'm listening to. I don't look any farther, and this is what I'm going to vote for. But in general, people, think about it. If you work in the public service industry, you're an educator. I was a nurse, and I'm resource management now. Resources have dwindled down to the point that people are desperate. It's not there anymore. And when they start looking, people will come in of the same genre. They come into Walmart or to a fast food joint, and they feel like they can take their frustration out on another public servant. And it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
These are the people that they're getting paid, but they're not getting paid much. And for you to walk in and take your frustration out on another human being, how wrong is that?
Yeah.
We've lost respect. We've lost civility. And I think in the end, people are going to see Donald is the epitome of the loss of respect and civility.
Yeah.
And nobody wants that.
Right.
Well, I'm going to let you speak.
Listen, we're gonna take our break now. What a beautiful place to take a break.
Thank you.
You've given people a lot to think about, Agnes. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I know our listeners do as well. We've gone a little bit beyond the top of the hour. We're only a couple of minutes beyond, and I usually do that without trying. So, wow, what a 15 minutes of conversation we just had. Thank you, Agnes. We're going to pause and take a 5-minute break and give people an opportunity to digest this, and then we'll come back. I was making a comment when Agnes called about the Washington Post, yesterday's Washington Post. There's a story in there, a human story, that I wanted to share with you, and hopefully when you get your time at the computer, you can look back in yesterday's Washington Post. Just all you got to do is look back to October 2nd. It was the lead story in the Sunday edition of the Post, and it's about a woman, a 52-year-old woman in Western Pennsylvania, and I want to share a few things from that story with you because I think it ties into many of the things that Agnes shared with us. You're listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We're going to pause and take a 5-minute break, and when we do, we'll come right back. So if you're in there, just hang in there with us. We won't be that long. It'll only be a few minutes. Thank you. Welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center on this Monday. Today is the 3rd day of October in the year 2016. Election day, 5 weeks from tomorrow. The next 4 weeks for me are going to be pretty darn busy. That doesn't mean that I won't be here, however. I'm going to make every effort in the world that I can to keep our date on these Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesdays and complete as many of these programs as I can. Because, very honestly, most of us don't get that many opportunities in our lifetime to experience the exchange with Agnes that we just had in that previous hour. I mean, to think that is a possibility every time we go on the air when one of our listeners chooses to call is just mind blowing. What a contribution! There's nothing to top that. Nothing. And I've been in education for my whole professional life, and I've had a number of opportunities to experience those kinds of exchanges. Not nearly enough. And that's that's the goal of teaching, is to find a way to teach in such a way that you can stimulate and encourage and precipitate those kinds of exchanges. But they don't come that often, unfortunately. But when they come, they're wonderful. Welcome to our second hour here at the Virtual Center. If you are just joining us, you missed something very special. Agnes took time to join us for the last 15 minutes of our first hour and just absolutely left us shaking our heads in amazement. It was just great. This hour, we're going to continue on that little theme a little bit, and it's beginning to look like we're probably going to have to hold for another day or two on the Booker T. Washington Du Bois exchange. But that's not going to go away. It occurred well over a century ago, so a day or two, one more day or two is probably not going to affect the issue that much. And the Colin Kaepernick thing, the protest continues to grow. So I don't think that's going to leave us either. It's still topical. It's still very, very important. People are still discussing it on the sports talk programs and all the rest of it. Welcome to the Virtual Center. And again, let me share with you our phone number and invite you to pick up the phone and join in a conversation like this. You can only contribute to it, and that benefits everybody. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to drop me an email and trust me to get your ideas on the air, I'd be glad to do that for you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. And again, I do encourage you to go to our Facebook page. There are a number of links, postings on there that I think are really worth your while. In fact, the one we looked at with Krauthammer was on Facebook. And the exchange with Chris Matthews as part of it is in that Facebook entry, that Facebook posting. So if you go to Facebook, just type in the search box the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, and you will have access to our Facebook page. And if you type in William A. O'Brien, candidate for the West Virginia House of Delegates, you'll also have access to my campaign Facebook page, and many of the same issues are on there. But there are a couple of things that aren't. There are a couple of things that are pertinent or germane to the election here in southern West Virginia that I didn't put on the Virtual Center page because I wasn't quite sure that it would be appropriate to get that local in some of the issues in our conversation. But more and more we find ourselves doing that anyway, because if you're looking for examples of principles that you're talking about or that you're trying to illustrate, where else can you go but to your local environment, to what you're familiar with, especially when an example comes up and hits you so strongly, as did that situation we talked about in the first hour about the hypocrisy of insulting Hillary with a very derogatory term and then leading prayer before dinner after that. So again, I do want to continue. If you can think back, and I'm not going to basically leave out those people that are just joining us. If you are just joining us, I don't think we're going to be into anything that you won't be able to join quickly in and understand. In our conversation in the first hour, we were talking about why it is that Donald Trump seems to be able to get away with things that in the past have traditionally sunk political campaigns. And we were talking about basically the issue of the establishment And the fact that Hillary and many of the pundits and the op-ed writers in the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and these others are all considered members of the establishment. They're all prominent journalists, they're college graduates, they're business leaders, they're prominent attorneys, et cetera, et cetera. And what that means is they're all part of the system, so-called. And what we're talking about when we're trying to get to the people who really emotionally tie in to the Trump campaign, to Donald Trump, we're talking about people that don't belong to that particular group. That these are people who see the establishment and all the different shades of people in it as being part of the problem, not part of the solution. These are people that would say, I've had enough of these professors and enough of these experts and enough of the damn polls and enough of the major newspapers trying to push their bill of goods and sell me on something that I'm not buying. I'm looking for a candidate who can come along and talk to me and get right to where I live and what I care about. I know about the economy because I'm living in it. And I'm not making it. Why doesn't anybody ever ask me about the economy? Instead of asking a multimillionaire or getting your information from Thomas Friedman or people like that in the New York Times or Sargent in the Washington Post or many of these other multimillionaires who are telling me about the economy, I can give you a perspective on the economy that you've never heard before just asking me. Just ask me. Well, Donald Trump is talking to this person. And what we're talking about is that this person is listening. Donald Trump has touched a chord, has touched an issue or a sensitivity that nobody else has been able to touch. These are people who have abandoned the system, who have stopped listening, stopped reading, stopped voting. Until now. And Donald Trump is bringing them back into the fold because he's promising to fix all the things that bother them. And the people who are criticizing him, they're people, as Chris Matthews said, who have had years to fix these problems and haven't done it. Why not give Trump a chance? Can't be any worse off than we are now. That's pretty much what Donald Trump is saying to these folks, and they're listening. I mentioned the Washington Post, Sunday edition. There was an article in Sunday's Washington Post, feature story, about a 52-year-old woman in Western Pennsylvania named Melanie Austin. And the title of the article, which was about why she supports Donald Trump, suggests that from Melanie Austin's perspective, finally a candidate who speaks my language. Finally a candidate who's talking to me. Finally a candidate who's saying things that I've been waiting my whole life to hear some political candidate say. And now he's saying it. And if you read that article about Melanie Austin, and then you hear the story of Melanie Austin's attendance at a Trump rally, and the things she agrees with, you'll understand exactly what our conversation in today's first hour was about. Donald Trump is speaking directly to Melanie Austin and the other Melanie Austins of this nation in ways that nobody else in political positions of influence has ever done before. And Melanie Austin is not about to turn her back on Donald Trump, especially when the people encouraging her to turn her back on Trump are the people who put her in the position that she's in from her perspective. These aren't people who want to fix the problem. These are the people who created it. Yesterday, the lead item, the major news, front page, was the New York Times revelation of Donald Trump's 1995 income tax return. And the fact that on that return, he claimed business losses totaling $915.7 million. That, I would suggest to you, is approaching $1 billion in losses. The man who was asking us to trust him with the office of President of the United States lost in 1 year $915.7 million. And of course, what that means is that he could, and the word that the accountants use, he could amortize those losses. He could spread those losses over as many as 18 years, which would mean that he can make $50 million in any one or all of those years before he has to pay a nickel in taxes. In theory, he could go the next 18 years and not pay any income taxes. Is that failure? Or, as Rudy Giuliani and Chris Christie told us this weekend, is that Donald Trump's genius? The fact that he has learned the system so well and learned how to play the game so well that only he can fix it. That's like saying the only people who have a right to criticize the death penalty are people who have experienced it. There's a problem there, obviously. Or the only people that can speak about discrimination in our world are people who have experienced it. The only way that we can really understand what it's like to be black in a white society is to be black or Hispanic. The only way to understand discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is to be gay. That's the logical extension of what we're saying here. Agnes obviously informed us when she called in the last hour that Donald Trump is part, when you're playing around with tens of millions of dollars in loans and debt and tax write-offs, you're in the establishment. You're part of the system. So the question is, can only somebody with his expertise fix it? That's the defense that Rudy Giuliani and Chris Christie are using to the release of Donald Trump's 1995 tax return. And again, he hasn't released his tax returns. We don't know what he did with that deduction. We don't know that he took it as a tax deduction. We don't know that he used it over the next 15 to 18 years so that he didn't have to pay any taxes in those years until after he made at least $50 million, because he's not giving us that access to that information. But we know that the the return itself is legitimate. One of the people who works for the New York Times took the document and went to Florida and looked up the accountant who signed it as the preparer for Donald Trump in 1995 and asked him to confirm the legitimacy of the document. And the man did that. Not only that, but you've probably heard about the discrepancy in the numbers on line 18. Line 18 is where you total up your losses, your business losses for the year. That's where the $915,732,000 and X dollars appeared. The fact of the matter is, on the document, the first two numbers in that figure, 9-1 of the 915 million, were a different font. And they weren't exactly lined up with the rest of the numbers. It looked like they had been added. Therefore, it looked like the document could have been doctored, laundered. The man who prepared the taxes said that the software program that he used to do Trump's taxes didn't have enough spaces for line 18 losses that large, that many numbers. So he had to type it in with a Selectric typewriter. And he attested to the fact that he did that and confirmed the fact that he had done it and explained why. The first thing that struck me is that most of us who do our own taxes, and I said us, and I shouldn't say that. I have a friend who's been doing my taxes for the last 25 years, because when I bought my first home, I grew up, my parents never owned their own home. So we never did taxes except the short form, the so-called, what used to be called the so-called 1040A form, where you get the standard deduction. Because we never felt that we never had the deductions substantial enough to warrant the long form because we didn't own our home. But when I bought my home, I realized that I had no idea how to do taxes. So I had to get somebody to prepare them for me, and I've been going to the same person ever since. The fact of the matter is, most of us never get to line 18. Because honestly, most of us, or many of us, don't have losses in that box at all, let alone losses that big. So the question is, are those losses a statement of failure or a statement of genius? If the system is designed to provide those losses to the few people who can take advantage of them, then maybe Donald Trump is a genius, because he's able to take advantage of all the leverage, all the leeway that the tax laws give him. The rest of us never get there. We can never know what the real problems in need of tax reform are all about. And what Donald is telling us is the system is unfair and he'll fix it. And the reason he knows it's unfair is because he's been taking advantage of it for years. Are you willing to cast your ballot for president based on that promise? Melanie Austin is, and millions of other Melanie Austins are as well also. So going back to Chris Matthews and Charles Krauthammer and the Wall Street Journal and Bill Kristol and many of the other conservative spokesmen who are refusing to support Donald Trump, and anticipating many of those who continue to support him. People are now beginning to think it's only a matter of time before they come around to their senses and come out against him as their colleagues have done. Many people believe that the release of this tax returns will precipitate that particular action. Many of his supporters will abandon ship with that information becoming public. Many people suspected it. Now we know it. I think this is an incredibly important issue. It obviously speaks to so many aspects of our constitutional system, the nature of our republic, the issue of taxes, the issue of paying taxes. In my mind is a document by none other than Alexander Hamilton, delivered in the New York Ratifying Convention, where the New York voters convened the convention to ratify the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton spoke in favor of it at that convention, and he talked about the values of building citizenship by requiring everybody to pay taxes. Hamilton believed and said that people who pay taxes feel that they have some ownership in the system, in the outcome. They become committed, concerned, informed citizens because they have skin in the game. Their money has gone to support this system. Therefore, how the system functions, how the people who run that system do their job, all of it becomes a matter of interest to taxpayers. In Donald Trump's case, he found a way to avoid taxes. At least in theory. We don't know that he did. But in theory, he could have. Does that mean that he's not a good citizen? Does that mean that he doesn't support the system? On the contrary, this is a system that enabled him to take a $915 million deduction. And one of the commentators made the point that that's larger than the budgets, the gross product of many entire nations in today's world. Those numbers appear on line 18 on the tax form. Most of us don't have anything to put in line 18. And if we do, it surely isn't a number that big. That was a number so big that even the software package that was developed for the purposes of doing the taxes didn't have that many spaces on it. Wow. Again, how many issues related to our republic, related to the mission of the Virtual Center, does this conversation touch on? The behavior of citizens, the legitimacy of the republic, the debate over what's right as opposed to what's ethical, the extent to which taking advantage of the system constitutes failure or genius, the fact that the system is written, the tax laws are written to benefit certain people when in fact most people can't take advantage of those benefits. Is that enough to warrant significant tax overhaul? Many citizens believe it is. I'm in the process right now of waiting on my tax return for last year, I filed for an extension. My taxes are just being completed. And I don't know what the bottom line is going to be. I can't wait to get them in the mail so I can sign them and send them in. But I'm kind of torn because I know that I'm going to have to pay taxes. What I'm worried about is I'll have to pay more than I've already paid. And here I am looking at Donald Trump, who's sitting on a $915.7 million loss in 95. Somehow, that doesn't set well with me. Somehow, that doesn't quite square with my definition of what's fair. Somehow, that doesn't quite gel with my definition of genius. I knew people who served prison time for robbing stores. And that's legal. $915 million. I think that's a topic we'll probably come back to more than one time. But we aren't done yet. I thought that this particular issue would probably be the real heart of our second hour today. But the fact of the matter is, we're into our final 30-minute segment of our second hour. Right now it is 37 minutes after the hour. That means we've got about 25 minutes left in our program today. I thought that we were going to have some time to focus on a document and then spend some time discussing its application and its implication for our understanding of today's political system. I don't think we'll have time for the analysis. I'm guessing that we may have time for the presentation of the information. So let me go there with the promise that we'll return to it in tomorrow's program. We'll review it, and then we'll discuss its applications and implications in our analysis to follow. But let me spend the time we have left today presenting the information. And let me open by telling you where you can look up this article. You can read it, and you can spend time thinking about the issues in preparation for tomorrow's program. I would encourage you to do that. To be a little bit loose with my language, I think this is one hell of an article. It appeared in the New York Times last Wednesday, the 28th of September. I remember it well because Thursday, the 29th, was my birthday. And this appeared on the 28th. I was aware of it. But on the other hand, our program on that day, on that Wednesday, didn't leave room for it, and we haven't been back together since. So I made up my mind that I would utilize this particular piece in today's program. And so much has happened between then and now that here we are an hour and a half after we've been on the air, and we're just getting to the issue at hand. with less than 25 minutes left in our time together today. The article I'm talking about is written in the op-ed section of last Wednesday's New York Times. The author is a familiar one, at least here on the Virtual Center, because I've made reference to articles by David Brooks many times. David is a regular columnist at the New York Times. He's been there for years. His columns appear on Tuesdays and Fridays. He has 2 columns a week. He is considered to be the conservative on staff. He's kind of the in-house conservative on the opinion pages of the New York Times. He has a reputation for that. But the fact of the matter is, as a conservative on a predominantly liberal paper, David Brooks is considered to be one of the best columnists that they have because he is perceptive, because his columns usually have something meaningful and worthwhile to say. It's not necessarily that you agree with everything he says. Frequently, I don't. I like to read the comments that readers make on columns that David Brooks writes, because most of the people who read the Times don't agree with David Brooks, and they say so. But the fact of the matter is, the way they say it and the way they have to say it is a credit to the abilities of David Brooks. In order to criticize him, you got to be pretty sharp, because he's pretty sharp. He and Krauthammer and George Will, I think, are all in the same general genre. They all basically are somewhat the same. I really believe that David Brooks, more often than not, has the most to say. He and Krauthammer. Occasionally George Will does. I've mentioned a number of articles that I've used here at the Virtual Center by George Will. My problem with George Will is he's more a political writer than he is a columnist and an analyst. I think Brooks and Krauthammer there's much more depth and substance to them than there is George Will. George Will is a brilliant writer, but sometimes I don't think the depth that these other guys function on is there. That's just my own opinion. I know that there would be a number of people that disagree with me, but that really begs the point. What is the article about? The title of the article is The Death of Idealism. The Death of Idealism. September 28th. September 30th is the day after my birthday, not the day before. It was Friday, September 30th. David Brooks is comparing Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump from the perspective of idealism. He points out that both of them together are the oldest candidates ever to run for the presidency. He points out that Hillary Clinton pretty much reflects the idealism that defined the 1960s in America, whereas Donald Trump reflects the idealism of the 1980s. Let me clarify that. And when I say I'm clarifying, this is the way Brooks clarifies it. I'm reading a paragraph on Donald Trump as a case study in the idealism of the 1980s. Trump opened Trump Towers on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan in November 1983. Go-to capitalism had a lot of elan, a lot of pizzazz, a lot of visibility back then. Capitalism had washed away the stagnation of the 1970s. Capitalism was defeating the Soviet Union. During the Reagan years, writers were celebrating capitalism not only as a wealth-generating engine, but also as a moral system, a way to arouse hard work, creativity, and trust. In other words, the reason that the 1980s was characterized by a form of idealism, positivism, optimism, that is associated with free enterprise capitalism. This was a period when capitalism took off. This was a period when capitalism was burying communism. This is a period when capitalism was fulfilling its potential to give people, creative, bright, hardworking people, the opportunities to make millions, to get rich on their own because of their own hard work and creativity. Consequently, this was the period that stimulated faith in capitalism as the way to bring out everybody's willingness to work, everybody's creativity, everybody's potential. And that's the world of capitalism 1980s that gave us Donald Trump. That's when he began to make his mark in the business world. That's the basis for David Brooks' idea of idealism as being a way to compare the idealism that Hillary Clinton represents with the idealism that Donald Trump represents. The problem is that it quickly became clear that Donald Trump was kind of on the shady end of capitalism. We all appreciated that there was a downside to capitalism, the selfish side. And that's the side where Donald Trump seemed to be doing most of his stuff, most of his business. That's the end of the capitalist spectrum that Donald Trump seemed to function on. Brooks makes the comments that at social get-togethers and parties in the 1980s, in the lobby of Trump Towers, if you went to those events, you ran into a lot of what Brooks called B-grade celebrities and corrupt city officials, all of them looking to get their names in the newspapers because they lived by reputation. Brooks says, a friend of mine came up to me at one of these parties and summarized the atmosphere. Quote, not indicted, not invited. In other words, most of the people at these affairs at Trump Towers tended to be the scuzzy types that were living on the edge, that with a couple of missteps could end up in prison. That seems to be the caliber of capitalist that Donald Trump was involved with and doing businesses with. And then then Brooks characterizes this in the Donald Trump that we see running for president, namely in last Monday night's debate with Hillary Clinton. As we saw on last Monday night, Brooks says, Trump now represents capitalism degraded to pure selfishness. He treats other people like objects, and he lies with abandon. Proud to be paying no taxes while others foot the bill. Proud to have profited off the housing bust that caused so many people so much suffering. He lacks even the barest conception of civic life and his responsibilities to it. His ethos is, get what I can for myself, everyone else can take care of themselves. That's the definition of capitalism that seems to most closely characterize Donald Trump. What that means is he's not really directly connected with the idealism of the 1980s. He's much more connected with the scuzzy side of the 1980s. The opportunities for selfishness that we all knew was there, but we hoped too many wouldn't take advantage of. Donald Trump lived there. That's where he did business, David Brooks says. Trump reminds us, Brooks says, how corrosive capitalism can be when unaccompanied by a counterbalancing ethos of moral restraint. If there isn't a moral code, if there isn't an ethical code to control behavior, if all that drives you is self-interest, what Madison said, factions are sown into the nature of man. If that's what drives you, then your result is Donald Trump. So in reality, Donald Trump is a product of the idealism of the 1980s, but he's not a reflection of it. He's in fact the anti-reflection of idealism in the 1980s. And then there's Hillary. In her address, her commencement address at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, she speaks to the idealism of the 1960s. She talks about leaders challenged to practice politics as the art of making what appears to be impossible possible. She says, quote, "We're not interested in social reconstruction. It's human reconstruction," she continued. "We're searching for more immediate, ecstatic, penetrating modes of living," unquote. In her address, she is speaking to the idealism of the 1960s, the idea of creating the utopia that is available for all, the idea of a community that can be so idealistic that it carries all in the society along with it. She dreamed, Brooks says, of a society in which trust would be restored. This is another quote from her commencement speech. Where you don't manipulate people, where you're not interested in social engineering for people. The words are grandiose, and there's a spiritual ambition to them. There's a sense of mission, a sense of reforming the world for the benefit of everybody. That's the idealism of the 1960s. That's what drove the anti-war protests. That's what drove the civil rights movement. That's what drove the so-called radicals of the 1960s to seek reform, to seek a better world and a better life for everybody. But as Brooks points out, that kind of poetic aspirational quality seems to be missing from Hillary Clinton's campaign. She's clever, she's informed, she's sharp. But Brooks says she lacks the human touch when talking about the nation's problems. She really can't seem to make an emotional connection. When asked why she wants to be president, or when she's asked for any positive vision, she comes up with a list of programs. Not just 3 programs or a couple of programs. She piles on with 7 or 8 different programs. This, Brooks says, is pure interest group liberalism, buying votes with federal money, not inspiring image of the common good. The idealistic, positive, poetic, aspirational side of idealism that seemed to characterize her in the 1960s is not there in her campaign. Rather, what is there is programs that appeal to the self-interest of certain people. Programs that will give you this and him that and her the other. Giveaways. Buying votes with federal programs. Consequently, Brooks concludes, the twin revolutions of the 1960s and the 1980s liberated the individual, first socially and then economically, but weakened community. More surprising, this boomer versus boomer campaign has decimated idealism. If you look at Clinton versus Trump, Trump versus Clinton, the idealism on both sides is gone. It's 2 competing versions of self-interest coming at each other. Hillary is saying, elect me president, I'll get programs through that'll take care of you here and this, that, and this, that, and this, that. And Trump is saying, elect me, I'll get government out of the way, I'll fix the things that are messing up your life, and you too can enjoy the good life. There is, Brooks says, no uplift in this campaign. There's an entire absence in both campaigns of any effort to appeal to the higher angels of our nature. There's an assumption in both campaigns that we're all self-seeking creatures, rather than also loving creatures, serving, hoping, dreaming, cooperating creatures. There's a presumption on the part of both candidates that the lowest motivations are the real motivations. What Brooks argues is that when this is over, whichever one wins, somehow we are going to have to restore idealism, hope, concern, sensitivity, respect for the dignity of other people. This me-firstism, this selfishness has got to go. We've got to go. It's 59 minutes after the hour. We've reached the end of our time together. We'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday. Remember, we start 30 minutes later tomorrow than we did today. This is the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed it. I learned an awful lot. I hope you did as well. Thank you, and please join us tomorrow. Have a good day.